Maya smoothed the silk of her crimson dress, the fabric cool against her skin despite the warmth she had tried to breathe into the small apartment. For months, she had curated this evening, tucking away portions of her modest earnings from tutoring to afford the vintage wine and the candles that now flickered like hopeful stars against the window pane. She had even practiced her Korean, rehearsing a soft speech about the future, about the life they were building in this towering, neon-lit city that still felt so foreign. She wanted to be the woman who made Daniel's world peaceful, the anchor he returned to after the chaos of the day. When the lock finally turned, Maya's heart performed a familiar, nervous flutter. She checked her reflection one last time, ensuring her hair was perfectly laid and her smile was ready to melt away whatever stress he carried. But as Daniel stepped inside, the air in the room didn't warm. It curdled. He didn't look at the table, set with meticulous care, or the gift she had wrapped with trembling fingers. He looked through her, his eyes cold and distant, reflecting a version of her that was small, inconvenient, and utterly invisible. "You're late," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of hope. "But I kept everything warm. Happy Valentine's Day, Daniel." He didn't offer a greeting. Instead, he dropped his keys on the counter with a sharp metallic clatter that sounded like a closing gate. "I'm not hungry, Maya. And I'm tired of this. Tired of the effort you force me to pretend to care about." The words were a physical blow. Maya's hand went to the small jewelry box she had hidden under a napkin, a simple, elegant watch. "I just wanted us to have one night where things felt like they used to." Daniel let out a harsh, jagged laugh as he grabbed the box, glancing at the brand before tossing it back onto the table like a piece of refuse. This is what you saved for? It's pathetic, Maya. You're embarrassing. You're always so desperate to belong in a world that clearly doesn't want you." "Daniel, please," she gasped, the tears finally breaking the surface. "Get out," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet edge. He didn't wait for her to move. He grabbed her heavy winter coat from the rack and shoved it into her arms. Before she could process the betrayal, his hand was on her shoulder, not in a caress, but a cold, final push. He opened the door, and the roar of the Seoul blizzard rushed in, a wall of white silence that swallowed the glow of her candles. With one last shove, he sent her stumbling into the hallway. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in her soul. Standing in her silk dress, her heels clicking on the cold tile, Maya looked at the wood grain of the door and realized the man she loved had just traded her heart for a night of freezing isolation. She was alone in the storm, and the city she had called home was now nothing but a vast, icy grave. The silk of the crimson dress felt like a mockery against Maya's skin, a vibrant splash of color in an apartment that had suddenly turned gray and hollow. She stood paralyzed in the center of the living room, her eyes fixed on the door that had just slammed shut. The sound of the deadbolt clicking home was a gunshot, echoing through the silence, killing the last of the hope she had nurtured for months. She looked down at the table. The candles she had carefully lit were still flickering, their warm glow illuminating the feast she had labored over, the spicy galbi-jim he loved, the vintage wine that had cost her a week's worth of tutoring wages, and the small, silver-wrapped box containing the watch. It all looked like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer existed. The rejection wasn't just in the shove or the slamming door. It was in the way he had looked at her. Daniel hadn't seen a woman, a partner, or even a human being. He had looked at her like she was a stain on his floor, an embarrassing remnant of a mistake he was finally cleaning up. Pathetic, he had called her. The word didn't just hurt. It redefined her. A single tear tracked through the careful makeup she had applied 3 hours ago. Maya reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the edge of the silk tablecloth. She thought of the sacrifices she had made, the Georgia sunshine she had traded for Seoul's biting gray, the career she had paused to support his climb, and the way she had slowly shrunk herself to fit into the narrow spaces of his life. She had made herself small so he could feel tall, only for him to step on her anyway. The heat from the candles couldn't reach the chill settling in her bones. Outside the window, the Seoul blizzard began to pick up, the wind howling against the glass like a warning. She was a foreigner with a revoked invitation, a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a heart that had turned to stone. She didn't scream or break the plates. Instead, she moved with the mechanical grace of the broken. She picked up her coat from where it lay on the floor, the heavy wool feeling like lead in her hands. She didn't look back at the flickering lights or the cooling food. She walked toward the balcony door, the only exit left to her, and stepped out into the freezing white silence. The wind immediately whipped her hair across her face, stinging like 1,000 tiny needles, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the absolute winter that had just claimed her soul. Maya took a breath of the icy air, her crimson dress a lone drop of blood against the rising snow, and began the long walk into the unknown. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a frozen abyss. When the doors opened to the lobby, the blast of winter air from the street was a violent intrusion, stripping away the last remnants of the apartment's artificial warmth. Maya stepped out into the night, her heels sinking into the fresh, powdery snow that had already claimed the sidewalk. The Seoul skyline, usually a vibrant tapestry of neon and ambition, was muted by the storm. Huge, heavy flakes swirled in the amber glow of the street lamps, creating a disorienting world of shifting shadows and white silence. Maya wrapped her wool coat tighter, but it was a thin shield against the biting wind that seemed to find every gap in the fabric. She looked at her phone, the screen glowing a harsh, clinical white against the darkness. Her thumb hovered over her contacts. She scrolled past names of people she had once called friends in Atlanta, faces that now felt like memories from a past life. She couldn't call her mother. The woman had already warned her about moving across the world for a man who looked at her like a prize rather than a partner. To call home was to admit defeat, to prove every doubt right. She looked at her local contacts. Co-workers who were mere acquaintances and friends she had met through Daniel. She realized with a sickening jolt that every person she knew in the city was an extension of him. To call them would be to invite more pity, or worse, more of Daniel's curated narrative that she was the emotional and unstable one. "I have no one," she whispered, her breath hitching in the frigid air. The realization was a heavy, physical weight, more suffocating than the snow. She was a ghost in a city of millions, an expatriate who had traded her safety net for a silk dress and a shattered promise. Her fingers grew numb, the skin turning a frightening shade of gray-blue as she gripped her phone. She looked at the passing cars, black sedans with tinted windows that sped by like silent predators, their headlights cutting through the haze but never stopping. The romantic lights of Valentine's Day now looked like predatory eyes, mocking her isolation. Her legs began to ache, the cold seeping through her stockings and into her joints. She wandered aimlessly, her direction dictated by the wind rather than a destination. Every storefront was locked, every window a barrier between her and the warmth she no longer possessed. As the city fell deeper into the quiet of the blizzard, Maya felt herself fading into the background, alone, shivering figure becoming part of the white silence that had claimed the night. She wasn't just lost. She was being erased. The streetlights of Gangnam blurred into long, weeping smears of amber as Maya's vision began to tunnel. Her lungs burned with every breath of the sub-zero air, the frost crystallizing on her eyelashes until the world was nothing but a shimmering, treacherous haze. The crimson silk of her dress, now dampened by the clinging snow, felt like a shroud of ice against her shivering frame. She had walked for miles, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost its meaning in the white silence, until a pair of towering, obsidian-black doors loomed out of the storm like the entrance to another world. The establishment was unmarked, save for a discreet, geometric symbol etched in gold above the lintel. It was a place of shadows and secrets, a sanctuary for those who moved the world from the dark. Maya's legs finally gave out, her knees striking the stone steps with a dull thud that she felt more than heard. She reached out, her numb fingers clawing at the freezing balustrade, but her strength had been bled dry by the wind and the heartbreak. As she slumped against the cold stone, the world began to tilt, the roar of the blizzard fading into a heavy, rhythmic thrumming in her ears. Suddenly, The heavy doors groaned open. A shaft of warm, expensive light spilled onto the snow, cutting through the darkness. A group of men in sharp, charcoal suits stepped out, their faces masks of professional indifference. At the center of the phalanx stood a man who didn't just occupy space, he commanded it. Lee Sang-won, the lord of the underworld, adjusted the cuff of his tailored black coat, his gaze sharp and predatory as he scanned the street for his waiting car. He stopped mid-stride. His eyes fell upon the heap of crimson silk and dark skin huddled at the base of his steps. His guards moved instinctively to clear the obstruction, but Sang-won raised a gloved hand, a silent command that froze them in place. He stepped down toward her, the snow crunching beneath his polished boots. Maya looked up, her gaze flickering and unfocused. Through the haze of her fading consciousness, she saw a face that was strikingly beautiful and terrifyingly cold, a man with a single red earring that caught the light like a drop of blood. She tried to speak, to apologize for her presence, but all that emerged was a shallow, ragged gasp. As the darkness finally claimed her, she felt a pair of strong, steady arms slide beneath her, lifting her from the icy stone. For the first time since the door had slammed to her face, the biting cold receded, replaced by a scent of sandalwood and something dangerous. She was no longer alone in the white silence. She had fallen at the feet of a dragon. The transition from the biting, lethal cold of the street to the interior of the club was a blur of golden light and the scent of expensive tobacco. Sang-won did not delegate the task. He kept Maya pressed against his chest, her damp silk dress bleeding a chill into his tailored coat. His men moved in a silent, synchronized orbit around him, their hands twitching toward their holsters, eyes scanning the shadows for a reason behind this sudden vulnerability. "Clear the private elevator," Sang-won commanded, his voice a low, melodic rasp that brooked no delay. As they moved through the opulent foyer, the heat of the building hit Maya's frozen skin like a physical blow, causing her to moan softly as the blood began to crawl back into her extremities. Sang-won looked down at her, his expression unreadable, though his grip tightened. His right hand, positioned securely under her shoulder, was impossible to miss. On the back of it sat a geometric tattoo, a sharp, obsidian symbol of a dragon's tail coiled into a diamond. It was a mark whispered about in the high-rises of Seoul, a seal of absolute authority that signaled both a death sentence for his enemies and an ironclad sanctuary for those under his wing. The elevator door slid shut, sealing them in a plush, velvet-lined silence. Inside the mirrored box, Maya's reflection was a ghost, pale, wet, and shattered. Beside her, Sang-won was a monument of dark power. He didn't look at the mirrors. He looked only at the woman who had collapsed at the Dragon's Gate on the one night the world was supposed to be kind to the brokenhearted. "You are a long way from home, American," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Maya's eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, catching the glint of his red earring and the intricate ink on his hand. In her delirious state, the tattoo didn't look like a warning. It looked like a promise. Her fingers, still blue-gray from the frost, brushed instinctively against the mark on his skin. It was the first time in years someone had held her without making her feel like a burden to be discarded. The elevator chimed as it reached the penthouse, opening directly into a space of vast, quiet luxury. Sang-won stepped out onto the heated marble floors, carrying her past floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the very skyline that had tried to swallow her whole. He laid her down on a sprawling sofa of soft, charcoal leather, his tattooed hand lingering on her shoulder for a second too long as he felt the frantic, bird-like rhythm of her heart. The storm was still raging outside, but as Sang-won draped a heavy cashmere throw over her, the white silence of the streets felt a lifetime away. "Sleep," he said, the word a command that doubled as a vow. "The world cannot reach you here." The transition from the lethal frost of the street to the heavy, sun-drenched silence of the penthouse was disorienting. When Maya's eyes finally flickered open, she wasn't met with the judgmental ticking of the clock in Daniel's apartment or the biting wind of the Seoul streets. Instead, she found herself staring at a ceiling of recessed lights and brushed silk, the air around her smelling faintly of sandalwood and old books. She tried to sit up, but her body protested with a dull, aching heaviness. She was tucked beneath a throw of charcoal cashmere, so soft it felt like a cloud. As her vision cleared, the sheer scale of her surroundings began to register. The room was a masterclass in gilded cage aesthetics, minimalist, expensive, and terrifyingly high above the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a Seoul that looked like a toy city, the snow still falling but unable to touch the warmth of the sanctuary. "You're awake," a voice murmured, low and resonant. Maya bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lee Sang-won sat in a high-backed leather chair near the window, a crystal glass of dark liquid resting in his hand. He had traded his heavy overcoat for a black silk shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the geometric dragon tattoo that seemed to pulse with a life of its own in the morning light. The red earring glinted as he turned his head to look at her. Where am I?" she rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "My home," he said simply. He stood up, his movements fluid and predatory, and walked toward her. He placed a glass of water on the obsidian side table. "My doctor looked at you. Exhaustion. Mild hypothermia. A broken heart, perhaps, but that is not a clinical diagnosis." Maya gripped the edge of the cashmere, her knuckles white. She looked at her hands, which were no longer gray-blue, but a healthy, warm brown again. "Why?" she whispered, the question escaping before she could stop it. "I'm nobody. I'm a foreigner with no money and nowhere to go. Why would someone like you save me?" Sang-won leaned back against the wall, his arms crossed, his gaze tracing the lines of her face with an intensity that made her want to hide and be seen all at once. He didn't offer a platitude about kindness. Men like him didn't believe in it. In this city, people walk past the broken every day because they are afraid of the mess, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "But I have never been afraid of a mess, Maya. And you didn't look like a nobody. You looked like a miracle that the storm was trying to steal." Maya looked away, the word miracle stinging more than Daniel's insults. She felt like a stray cat brought into a palace, waiting for the moment the owner realized his mistake and threw her back into the white silence. But as Sang-won watched her, his tattooed hand resting near the water glass, she realized the gate to this cage was locked, not to keep her in, but to keep the world out. The silence of the penthouse was broken only by the soft chime of silver against porcelain as a maid placed a tray of broth and tea before Maya. Instinctively, Maya flinched, her shoulders hunching toward her ears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice habitual and thin. "I didn't mean to be a trouble. I can clean that up. I shouldn't have let you." "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a falling axe. Sang-won remained by the window, but his reflection in the glass was stern, his dark eyes locked onto hers. He moved toward the sofa, each step slow and deliberate, until he stood directly over her. "Why are you apologizing?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Maya looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the cashmere throw. I know I'm taking up space. I know I'm a burden. Daniel always said that I was lucky he kept me around, that I was a lot to handle." Sang-won reached down, his tattooed hand gripping the edge of the obsidian table. He didn't touch her, but his presence was an overwhelming force, a wall of heat and iron. A man who calls a woman a burden is a man who is too weak to carry the weight of her value. He made you small so he wouldn't have to grow. "I just don't want to be a problem," Maya murmured, her eyes brimming with the familiar sting of shame. "You are not a problem to be solved, Maya. You are a person to be seen." Sang-won leaned in closer, the red earrings swaying slightly. "In my world, we do not apologize for existing. We do not apologize for taking what we need to survive. Every time you say sorry for being hungry, or for being cold, or for simply being alive, you're handing a knife to your enemies and showing them where to cut." Maya looked up at him, her breath hitching. No one had ever spoken to her with such fierce, terrifying clarity. Daniel's love had been a series of subtractions. Sang-won's attention felt like a sudden, violent addition. "Say it," Sang-won commanded, his gaze unyielding. "Say what?" That you are enough.
Right now.
Without the silk dress, without the money, without the man who threw you away. You are enough because you survived a night that would have killed a lesser soul. Maya opened her mouth, but the words felt heavy, like stones she wasn't allowed to carry. She looked into his eyes, cold, ruthless, yet somehow the only mirrors that didn't reflect a broken version of herself. I am enough, she whispered. Louder, he countered, his tattooed hand tightening on the table. I am enough. This time her voice didn't shake. Sang-won gave a single, sharp nod, a shadow of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. Good. Now eat. A queen cannot reclaim her kingdom on an empty stomach. A week after the storm, the snow had turned into a shimmering glaze over the city, but the cold remained biting. Sang-won insisted on the outing. He didn't ask. He simply had a tailored wool coat in a deep camel shade and soft leather boots waiting for Maya. As they stepped out of the private elevator into the underground garage, a fleet of black sedans stood ready, drivers bowing in a synchronized wave of reverence that made Maya's breath hitch. Stay close, Sang-won murmured, his hand finding the small of her back. The touch was grounding, a physical reminder of the boundary he had drawn between her and the rest of the world. They arrived at an exclusive boutique in Cheongdam-dong that had been cleared of all other patrons. As they walked through the door, the staff didn't just greet them. They stood with a terrified sort of respect, their eyes flickering briefly to Maya before dropping to the floor. She felt the weight of their curiosity, the black woman on the arm of the city's most dangerous shadow, but before the discomfort could settle, Sang-won stepped slightly in front of her. The light in the store caught the red earring in his ear, a sharp spark of rebellion against his dark, formal attire. To Maya, it had become a beacon. Whenever the stairs of the world felt too heavy, she looked for that flash of red. It was the mark of a man who didn't care for rules, a man who had decided she was under his protection. The silk dresses, Sang-won commanded, his voice echoing in the quiet shop. And the diamonds. Something that matches the fire she tried to keep lit in the snow. As Maya tried on a gown of midnight blue, she caught their reflection in the three-way mirror. Sang-won stood behind her, his tattooed hand resting on her shoulder, his reflection intense and watchful. He wasn't looking at the clothes. He was watching the door, his eyes scanning the street through the glass. He was a shield, a living fortress that had turned the city's judgment into a distant, muffled noise. Later, as they walked back to the car, a group of men in suits, high-level associates or rivals, Maya couldn't tell, approached with a hurried air. The air tension spiked instantly. Maya felt the old urge to shrink, to apologize for being in the way. But Sang-won's grip on her arm tightened. He didn't move aside. He made them wait, his silence a powerful rebuke, until he had safely tucked Maya into the car. Only then did he turn to face them, the red earring glinting like a warning light. In that moment, Maya realized that for the first time in Korea, she wasn't invisible. She was untouchable. The drive back from the boutique was quiet, the interior of the sedan a warm, leather-scented cocoon. Maya watched the city speed by, feeling a strange, new sensation of safety, until she saw it. Through the tinted window, a silver sedan lingered 3 cars back, weaving through the slush with a calculated persistence. Her heart gave a sharp, panicked kick. She recognized that car. She recognized the aggressive way it nudged through traffic, a ghost from the life she had barely escaped. "Daniel," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Sang-won didn't turn his head, but his posture shifted instantly. The relaxed air of the benefactor vanished, replaced by the rigid, lethal focus of a predator. He glanced at the side mirror, his eyes narrowing. He didn't ask Maya if she was sure. He simply reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the geometric tattoo on his skin as if drawing strength from the ink. "He followed us," Maya rasped, her voice trembling. "He's been calling, leaving messages. He says I stole things. He says I can't just leave him." "He is mistaken," Sang-won said. His voice was no longer a low rumble. It was a cold, sharp blade. He tapped the partition to the driver. "Take the long route through the industrial district. Signal the trailing unit to intercept." The car swerved, leaving the glittering lights of the main road for the stark, shadow-drenched streets of the warehouse district. The silver sedan followed, accelerating as the roads emptied. Maya gripped Sangwon's arm, her eyes wide as she watched the pursuit. She expected fear, but looking at Sangwon, she saw only a terrifying, focused calm. In a sudden, coordinated movement, two other black SUVs appeared from side streets, boxing the silver sedan into a snow-covered alleyway. Sangwon's driver slammed on the brakes. Before Maya could speak, Sangwon was out of the car. Through the rear window, she watched the ruthless side of the man who had fed her broth and told her she was enough. He didn't run. He walked toward the trapped car with the terrifying grace of a king. When Daniel scrambled out, shouting threats about his property and Maya's betrayal, Sangwon didn't waste words. He moved with a speed that blurred in the snowy air, his hand found Daniel's throat, pinning him against the silver hood. The red earring glinted like a drop of fresh blood under the dim street lamps. Sangwon leaned in, whispering something into Daniel's ear that made the younger man's face drain of all color. He didn't hit him. He simply stared into his soul with eyes that had seen the end of empires. After a moment, Sangwon stepped back, wiping his hand with a silk handkerchief as if Daniel were nothing more than a smudge of dirt. When Sangwon returned to the car, his expression softened only when he looked at Maya. "He will not follow you again," he said, his voice returning to its protective warmth. "The shadows of your past have no place in my light." The adrenaline from the confrontation in the alley lingered in the car like the ozone after a lightning strike. Maya watched Sangwon's hands, the same hands that had nearly crushed a man's throat, as they meticulously smoothed his silk handkerchief. He looked perfectly composed, yet the air around him hummed with a restless, dark energy. Back at the penthouse, the city lights flickered below them like embers in a dying fire. Sangwon poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, but didn't sit in his usual leather throne. Instead, he sat on the floor by the low obsidian table, beckoning Maya to join him. The shift in his stature, from the towering lord to a man grounded, made the vast room feel suddenly intimate. "You look at my hand often," he said, holding his right hand out so the dragon tattoo caught the low light. "You see a mark of power. Most people do." Maya traced the sharp, geometric lines with her eyes. "It's beautiful, but it feels like a heavy thing to carry." Sangwon looked at the ink, his gaze turning inward. "I didn't get this to be feared. I got it to cover a scar." He turned his hand over, showing her the underside of his wrist where a jagged, white line peeked out from beneath the dragon's tail. "When I was 7, my mother left me at the gates of an orphanage in Busan. She told me to wait, that she was just going to buy bread. I waited until the sun went down and the snow began to fall. I tried to follow her, but the gates were locked. I climbed the fence, and the wire tore me open." Maya felt a sharp, sympathetic ache in her chest. She thought of her own gates, the door Daniel had slammed, the city that had refused to see her. "You are just a child," she whispered. "I learned that night that the world only respects what it cannot break," Sangwon said, his voice dropping to a vulnerable register she hadn't heard before. "The tattoo is a reminder that I am the one who locks the gates now. I built an empire so I would never have to wait in the snow for anyone ever again." Maya reached out, her fingers tentatively brushing the ink. "I spent my whole life trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect wife, just so someone wouldn't leave me. I thought if I was good enough, I'd be safe. But the snow found me anyway." Sangwon turned his hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The heat of his palm was a direct contrast to the stories of ice they were sharing. "We're the same, Maya. 2 souls abandoned by the people who were supposed to be our homes. But look at us now." He raised her hand, his tattooed skin dark against hers. "The world tried to erase us, yet here we are unbroken and in the light." In the quiet of the penthouse, the lord of the underworld and the woman the world had discarded sat in the silence, no longer strangers, but 2 survivors recognizing the same battle scars. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows across the expansive living area but the atmosphere remained heavy with the truth of their shared scars. Maya sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands still resting within the warmth of Sangwon's. For years, she had lived under the weight of Daniel's words, the constant, subtle reminders that her presence was a debt she could never repay, a weight he grudgingly bore. She had begun to see herself through that warped lens, a burden, a charity case, a person whose value was tied to how little trouble she caused. Sangwon watched her, his gaze intense enough to strip away the lingering layers of her self-doubt. He didn't look at her with the pity she had come to expect from the few people who knew her story. Instead, he looked at her with a profound, terrifying awe. "You are still waiting for the bill, aren't you?" he asked softly, the red earring catching the firelight. "You are waiting for me to tell you what this costs, or when you have to leave because you've taken too much." Maya looked down, her voice a mere whisper. "I've spent my whole life trying to be lighter, so I wouldn't crush the people I love. I know I'm a lot to handle," Sangwon. "I'm a foreigner who doesn't fit, a woman with a broken past, Stop," he interrupted, but this time his voice wasn't a command. It was an invitation. He reached out, his tattooed hand gently cupping her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You keep using that word. Burden. You think you are a weight because a small man couldn't carry the depth of your soul." He leaned in, his forehead almost touching hers. "In my world, Maya, we deal in gold, in power, in lives. But we rarely find something that is pure. You survived the white silence. You kept your heart soft even when the world tried to turn it to stone. To me, you aren't a burden." He paused, a rare, genuine smile softening the hard lines of his face. "You are a miracle. The fact that you fell at my gates, that you are sitting here now, breathing and whole, it is the only beautiful thing that has happened in this house since the day I built it." The word miracle shattered something inside Maya. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a total reconfiguration of her identity. The pathetic girl in the snow was dying, and in her place, a woman was being born. One who realized that her worth wasn't determined by who left her, but by the light she still carried. Tears blurred her vision, but they weren't tears of shame. They were the sound of the ice finally melting. For the first time, she didn't look for the exit. She looked into the dragon's eyes and finally felt at home. The shift in Maya was subtle at first, like the quiet turning of a tide, but soon it became the very atmosphere of the penthouse. She no longer kept her gaze lowered when Sangwon's lieutenants entered the room, nor did she retreat to the shadows when the air grew thick with the tension of the underworld. Instead of hiding, she began to observe. She watched the way power was bartered in hushed tones over obsidian tables and how a single nod from Sangwon could shift the fate of a dozen shipping lanes. One evening, while a high-ranking associate stuttered through an explanation of a shipment delay, Maya didn't leave the room. She stood by the window, the midnight blue of her new silk gown reflecting the cold neon of the city below. She noticed the man's eyes darting toward the balcony, a classic tell of someone hiding a secondary agenda. When the associate left, Sangwon looked at her, his red earring catching a stray spark of light. "He's lying," Maya said, her voice steady and devoid of the apologies that used to anchor her. "He wasn't looking at you. He was looking for an exit. He's already made a deal with the port authorities." Sangwon leaned back, a predatory gleam of pride entering his eyes. He didn't question her intuition. He merely signaled his shadow security to investigate. "You are learning the language of the dragon, Maya." "I spent 5 years learning how to read the moods of a man who wanted to break me," she replied, walking toward him with a newfound grace. "Reading men who want to rob you is much simpler." She began to move through his world not as a guest, but as a partner in the making. She sat in on strategy sessions, her presence a silent, elegant force that unsettled Sangwon's rivals. They didn't know what to make of the black American woman who stood at the right hand of the dragon, her eyes sharp and her silence heavy with intelligence. She learned the ledger of his alliances and the complex web of debts that kept the city in check. She was no longer playing the part of the victim. She was studying the board, identifying the pieces, and realizing that her unique perspective, as someone who had seen the world from the very bottom, gave her a clarity the syndicate's lifelong soldiers lacked. When she walked through the club now, the guards didn't just bow out of duty. They bowed because they sensed the shift in the wind. Maya wasn't just surviving the syndicate, she was beginning to master it. She had stopped being a piece in someone else's game and had started her own gambit, proving that a queen wasn't just born, she was forged in the fire of her own choosing. The snowfall returned to Seoul with a gentle, rhythmic grace, dusting the city in a fresh layer of white that no longer felt like a shroud. Standing on the expansive terrace of the penthouse, Maya leaned against a cold stone railing, but the chill couldn't reach her. She wore a coat of deep obsidian wool, her hair catching the crystalline flakes like tiny diamonds. Beside her, Sang-won stood in silence, his presence a warm, immovable mountain against the winter wind. He didn't speak, but his hand moved to find hers, his tattooed fingers interlocking with hers in a grip that had become her anchor. Maya looked out at the glittering skyline, the same lights that had once mocked her isolation, and realized they no longer looked like predatory eyes. They were merely lights, and she was the one looking down on them from a place of absolute security. "A year ago," Maya whispered, her breath a soft plume in the air, "I thought the snow was the end of me. I thought being cast out meant I had ceased to exist." Sang-won turned to her, the red earring glinting with a sharp, crimson spark. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that still made her heart skip. "The snow didn't end you, Maya. It simply washed away the person you were pretending to be to please a man who was blind." He stepped closer, shielding her from a sudden gust of wind with his own body. "You were never meant to be a shadow. You were always the light." For the first time in her life, Maya didn't look for a hidden meaning or a coming rejection. She saw the truth in his eyes, a reflection of a woman who is powerful, intelligent, and deeply loved. She thought of the journey from the Dragon's Gate to this height, from a discarded stranger to a woman whose word held weight in the city's most dangerous circles. She wasn't just safe because of his walls or his soldiers. She was safe because she finally believed she deserved to be. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying over the quiet hum of the city. "You have no reason to be," Sang-won replied, his voice a low, protective vow. "You are the untouchable queen of this skyline, and I am merely the man lucky enough to stand beside you." He pulled her into his arms, his chin resting atop her head as they watched the snow cover the world below. In the silence of the night, Maya finally felt it, the profound, quiet hum of being truly cherished. The white silence was no longer a void, it was a canvas, and together, they were painting a future that no storm could ever erase. She was home. Maya's story reminds us that even in the white silence of our loneliest moments, we are never truly finished. We are simply being forged. If Maya's transition from a discarded nobody to a woman truly cherished resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of resilience, redemption, and the hidden strength within life's deepest wounds. Drop a comment below with the word "unbroken" if you believe that your best chapter is still waiting to be written.